Now that Notre Dame's season has finally come to an end, the door for players to enter the transfer portal has opened. Plus, star cornerback Benjamin Morrison officially declared for the NFL draft, and his rise as a player is one of the many reasons why Mike Mickens should be Notre Dame's next defensive coordinator. That's all coming up on today's Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into another edition of Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. My name is Tyler Wojciak and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports. And happy Friday, everybody. Today is Friday, January 24th, and I gotta admit, this has been a really long week. The national championship, which was on Monday, feels like a really long time ago, so I'm glad we made it to this point, and I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day. If you're new to the show, please take a quick second to hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So, one great thing about Notre Dame's playoff run, besides winning 3 awesome games and going on one of the most impressive runs in school history, is that we didn't have to talk about any players leaving for the transfer portal while everyone else around the country was dealing with exactly that. The fact that everyone who was still on the team remained fully committed to the team throughout the playoffs, even if they weren't playing much and they probably knew they were going to leave, is a really positive reflection of the culture in that locker room, because that certainly wasn't the case for everybody. Look at Penn State. Their backup quarterback, who they used regularly in run packages, left before the playoffs even started, and Georgia lost a few guys as well. So that didn't happen with Notre Dame. Everyone remained committed to the cause, but now that the season is over, players have 5 days to enter their names in the transfer portal, because it actually closed for everyone else a few weeks ago. But for everyone who's in the playoffs, they get a 5 additional day window once their season ends. And that's what Notre Dame is dealing with right now. And we've already seen some names file in. On Wednesday, guard Sam Pendleton became the first player to enter his name in the portal this offseason. And then wide receivers Jayden Thomas and Deion Colzie did the same a few hours later. On Thursday, 3 more offensive linemen entered the portal, including starters Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan, plus reserve tackle Ty Chan. And then on top of all of that, star cornerback Benjamin Morrison declared for the NFL draft on Thursday, and Notre Dame is still looking for a defensive coordinator. So I'm going to discuss all of the departures that we know about on today's show. Maybe by the time that you're listening to this, there will be more, and I will certainly get to those in the future. But I want to start with the offensive linemen, because they are the most significant to enter the transfer portal thus far. In total, Notre Dame has lost 4 offensive linemen, including 2 players who started over 13 games, and then 1 more who started 7 games, as well as reserve in Ty Chan. So Coogan, Spindler, and Pendleton all have starting experience. And anytime you lose a guy who you have counted on to start games, that's unfortunate, but it's a reality in college football. Another reality is when some players come out of high school, they're top recruits, and they just don't pan out. That was the case with Ty Chan. But I would say with the other guys, like Coogan, Spindler, and Pendleton, these aren't really that surprising either. And that's my biggest takeaway as I evaluate everyone who has entered their name in the transfer portal so far on Notre Dame. It's not fun to lose these guys, but not one of them is a lock to start next season. As a matter of fact, it's unlikely that any single one of those guys would be a starter next year, barring injury. So to people on the outside, they might think the sky is falling at Notre Dame, right? I've certainly seen that a little bit on social media. Some people are like, wait a second, how did Notre Dame just lose 2 starters to the transfer portal, especially 2 guys who started in the national championship game? Like, what's going on in South Bend? Is the sky falling? Is the culture that Marcus Freeman built really all that great? I saw some people from LSU saying things like that. It's like, okay. Just tell me you don't know what you're talking about. It's the ultimate tell on yourself move. It's kind of like what I was talking about earlier in the week, whenever anyone would be like, well, Notre Dame didn't even deserve to be in the national championship. It's like, okay, thanks for letting me know that you don't know what you're talking about, because if you are surprised by any of this news, you haven't been paying attention. And no, I don't expect everyone to know the ins and the outs of Notre Dame's too deep on the offensive line, but still, none of this is a surprise. Let's look at Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler, because look, losing these 2 guys hurts the most. They are great leaders in that room. I'm going to miss the Pat Coogan hype videos, because he had all these great quotes that turned into t-shirts and flags and all of that, but he's probably not going to start next year for Notre Dame. And it would be tough for Spindler to do the same. But They did surprise everyone last year, before 2023, when they both won jobs in camp at both guard positions. No one was really expecting that. And then Pat Coogan ended up starting 13 games at left guard last year and then 13 more at center this year. Rocco Spindler started 10 games at right guard in 2023 and then 13 more this past season. So that is a combined 49 starts between the two of those guys, and that's a lot, especially at a position like offensive line where experience is so valuable. It's arguably more valuable than any other position except quarterback. But when you go through the timeline of how we got to this point, you understand the big picture. Because, like I said, they surprised everyone when they won the starting jobs back in 2023. Everyone assumed it was going to be Billy Schrauth and Andrew Kostovich, but that didn't happen. Then Coogan started the entire year, and then Spindler started 10 games before he got hurt against Clemson, and then his season ended after that. Then both those guys came back for the 2024 season, and they both lost their starting jobs before the season even started. Billy Schrauth had emerged. He had locked up one guard spot, and then it felt like a battle between Coogan and Spindler for the other one. And then out of nowhere, Sam Pendleton beat them both out. That was another shock. So 2 years in a row, you get a big surprise at the starting guard spot for the season opener. Pendleton started the first 7 games of this season, but then Rocco Spindler beat him out after he was filling in for Billy Schrauth. Billy Schrauth went out with an injury against Purdue, same game that Notre Dame lost their starting center, Ashton Craig, for the full season. And then when Rocco Spindler came in for Billy Schrauth, he was playing really well. And by the time that Schrauth was back healthy, ready to be reinserted back into the starting lineup, Spindler was just outplaying Pendleton by that point. So he remained in the starting lineup, and Pendleton became the odd man out. So now you have a situation where Spindler is outplaying Pendleton, and now Pendleton is on the bench. Billy Schrauth, he's back in the starting lineup. He's going to be around for some time. And even though Pat Coogan did really well at center this year, the staff is so high on Ashton Craig that they told Zeke Correll that he should probably leave the program because Ashton Craig was going to be the starter in 2024. And Correll was a multi-year starter. So that kind of tells you how much the staff believes in Craig's ability, as well as Billy Schrauth. So now Schrauth is coming back. You know he's going to be the left guard. Ashton Craig is going to return from his injury. He's going to be the starting center. At right guard, it could be a battle between Spindler and Coogan again, or they could go with Charles Jagasaw, who came in for Spindler during the Penn State game. And we know Jagasaw is a bona fide stud. I don't know where he's going to start next year. I just know that he's going to start so long as he remains healthy. It could be at left tackle, which is where he was supposed to start before the season, or they could move him to right guard because Anthony Knapp, who came in for Charles Jagasaw at left tackle, was really solid as a true freshman up until he got hurt and had to miss the national championship game. So Jagasaw's only going to get better. Anthony Knapp could only get better. And both of those guys could be moved to the guard spot, and then maybe one of them wins over Coogan and Spindler. Oh, and by the way, they have Gerby Lambert at tackle, who's a 5-star coming out of high school and has all the physical tools to be a top NFL draft pick. And then at right tackle, you've got Emil Wagner, who surprised a lot of people this year, and he has 2 more years of eligibility remaining. So when you break it all down, there is no guarantee that any one of these guys, Spindler, Coogan, or Pendleton, is going to start next year. Every single one of them has felt that feeling of winning a starting job and then losing it during the careers. And I can't imagine it's a fun feeling. So I give them a ton of credit for sticking it out this season, and they were rewarded with the experience of starting in the national championship game, at least for Coogan and Spindler. And then Sam Pendleton even got in the action against IU when Spindler went down in that game. I think the unfortunate reality is all 3 of these guys see the writing on the wall, and they want to use their eligibility, their opportunity to play by actually getting on the field. Like Coogan and Spindler, they only have 1 year left, man. They can't really afford to just come back to Notre Dame and run the risk of not playing at all this year because, like, the hope is that Notre Dame isn't going to be decimated on the offensive line next year, and the starting 5 that they roll out in the season opener is the one that just carries them through the whole season. Unfortunately, that's not always the reality, so it'd be great to have these guys come back and be backup so that if an injury does happen, they're ready to go, and then you've got a guy with a ton of starting experience coming in as a backup, but that just doesn't really happen, right? This is the nature of college football. Would Notre Dame love to have him back? Absolutely. If they did, if they had Coogan, Spindler, and Pendleton all come back next year, they would have the deepest offensive line room ever if all of these guys were willing to be backups next year, but these guys don't want to do that. They want to play football. They've got 1 year left guaranteed. I don't think any one of these guys is going to be an NFL player. Maybe Sam Pendleton because he's got several years left, but Coogan and Spindler, I just don't really see it. So they got to use their one year left to play football and also get paid. Let's be honest. They're probably going to get paid as starting offensive linemen somewhere else. They're not going to get that same kind of money at Notre Dame because they're going to be paying the starting offensive line. But more than that, if they want to play in the NFL, which I'm sure they all do, they need to give themselves the shot. They've certainly earned that. They can't afford to sit on the bench during the last year of their careers. They need to get good tape out there. Same with Sam Pendleton because guys like Jagasaw, guys like Knapp, they have several years of eligibility remaining, so they aren't going away anytime soon. And these guys all want to get on the field, and unfortunately, the path to the field for them is not very clear at Notre Dame. So looking at the offensive line next year, Notre Dame's unit is still going to be stacked. You could have Anthony Knapp or Gerby Lambert at left tackle or Charles Jagasaw. Billy Shrout is really good. Ashton Craig is going to be really good. Once he comes back from his injury at right guard, we're going to see who ends up winning that job. And then Emil Wagner. Not only are they all coming back next year, but they could all come back in 2026 as well. So I think all of that plays into this equation here. And it's unfortunate to see them go because, like I said, these guys gave everything they had to the program. But if the guys I just mentioned, like Knapp, Shrouth, Craig, Jagasaw, Emil Wagner, Gerby Lambert, and then Will Black, the incoming freshman. If all those guys are just better than them, then they are going to play, and it's not worth it for Coogan, Spindler, and Pendleton to risk their last remaining years of eligibility and just wait for an injury to get back out in the field. That group I just mentioned, by the way, that's loaded. That is a loaded unit, and I have a ton of confidence that Notre Dame is going to have one of the best offensive line in the entire country next year. And these departures are really just a testament to the talent that they have built in that room. All right, coming up, how is Notre Dame going to replace Jayden Thomas and Deion Colzie at wide receiver? And how should we remember Benjamin Morrison? That's next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Attending NFL playoff games is an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, and the connection with other fans is unmatched. I remember the thrill of seeing my favorite team clinch a playoff win live, and it is a memory that I'm never going to forget. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature called Game Time Picks. It filters out the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what really matters, being there. I used Game Time Picks to grab tickets for a playoff game, and it could not have been easier. I found a super deal that gave me incredible value for amazing seats, and I could even preview the view from my spot before buying. The all-in pricing is a game changer. No surprise fees at checkout. Plus, knowing my tickets are backed by the Game Time guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. And their curated deals make it easier to find the best price on great seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So in addition to losing 4 offensive linemen, Notre Dame has now lost 2 members of the wide receiver room, Jayden Thomas and Deion Colzie. And like the situation at offensive line, neither one of those guys are going to start for Notre Dame in their last year of eligibility. Colzie barely played this past year. And even though Jayden Thomas was a regular contributor, he certainly played a good amount. He was honestly used more in the blocking game than as a pass catcher, which isn't the most fun thing in the world as a wide receiver. But by all accounts, these guys are great dudes, great people for the locker room, and I'm sure that they're going to be missed. Jayden Thomas was a big player. He was given a bunch of pregame speeches, didn't quite have the same fanfare as Pat Coogan's, but when you look at all the pictures of the team breaking it down before they go back in the tunnel after warming up, Jayden Thomas was the guy speaking to the rest of the team. So I think that shows you the type of credibility he had with that entire team. But unfortunately for Jayden Thomas, there just really isn't a clear path for him to contribute for Notre Dame's wide receiver room next year. And I think if you look back on his career, that hamstring injury that he suffered in 2023 was just so unfortunate, and it really stunted his career because he was wide receiver 1 going into 2023. I think people forget that him and Sam Hartman were going to be a dynamic duo, which sounds crazy to say now that we know everything that has happened over the past couple of years. But I remember watching that blue gold game in 2023. Sam Hartman comes out there, he's dicing up the defense, right? He's clicking, and guess who his favorite target was? It was Jayden Thomas. He was going to be the guy for the Notre Dame wide receiver room. He had a touchdown in the season opener against Navy, and you're thinking, man, this guy could really come on and build off a really strong 2022 when he had 25 receptions, 361 yards, and 3 touchdowns. But then he suffered that hamstring injury in the Ohio State game, and he was not the same the rest of the year. Came back, had 4 catches, 60-plus yards in the Sun Bowl, and I thought, okay, this year, hopefully, Notre Dame is going to have a better wide receiver room, and he could still be a key piece. But his production dipped every single year after 2022. 2023 was obviously due to injury. Didn't play nearly as much, but he had less receptions, yards, and touchdowns. Then his numbers were even worse in 2024, despite the fact that he was healthy all year. They still used him as a blocker. He had a touchdown against Indiana. But I think it's time for him to get a fresh start somewhere else because Notre Dame continued to add to the wide receiver room in the transfer portal. Last season, they got Bo Collins, they got Chris Mitchell, they got Jayden Harrison. Then this year, they brought in Malachi Fields, who's probably the best wide receiver they've brought in the transfer portal ever. He's going to start at boundary, had over 800 receiving yards for Virginia the past couple seasons. He is probably going to be wide receiver 1 next year. That's a big-time pickup. And then Jane Greathouse and Jordan Faison are hopefully going to have really great years next season as well. Greathouse was unbelievable the last 2 games of the season, and then Faison had some really great moments as well. So you've got Fields, Greathouse, and Faison as the most likely starters next year. They also added Wisconsin transfer Will Pauling to help out at slot. And then you've got the young guys like Micah Gilbert, Cam Williams, Logan Soldate. They're probably ready to emerge next year as well. So even though I think Jayden Thomas would have played, there's just too many guys now who are probably a little bit more athletic and might fit Mike Denbrock's scheme a little bit more on the outside than Jayden Thomas. Deion Colzie, another odd career arc in a way because he started as a true freshman back in 2022. Actually, let me rephrase it. He didn't start, but he contributed as a true freshman that year. He caught 4 passes. I remember he had a big 3rd down conversion against USC that year. Was a pretty highly touted recruit from Georgia. Then in the end of the 2022 season, his sophomore year, after a pretty disappointing start to the year, he really came on, especially on 3rd downs, had a great touchdown catch against USC, and you're thinking, man, is he ready to take off? That just didn't happen for him in 2023. Did have a touchdown against Navy in the season opener, but then missed most of that season due to injury, and then he was just buried on the depth chart in 2024. So losing veterans like this is unfortunate, but again, they were not going to start next year. Jayden Thomas would have played, but he probably would have been more of a blocker anyway, especially now that Cooper Flanagan is likely going to miss some time next year as he recovers from an Achilles injury that he suffered against Georgia. So like Thomas would have been basically like a de facto tight end. And if you're Jayden Thomas, you know you have ability. You know you can catch passes. That's really not how you want to spend your last year of college football. For Deion Colzie, he's going to just try to go somewhere and make a name for himself, give it one more shot, try to crack the depth chart somewhere. So both of these guys, I understand the moves. It's just unfortunate because it seems like they're really well-liked in the locker room. But again, this is just what happens in the modern age of college football. Another thing that happens all the time in the modern age of college football is that great teams lose star players to the NFL draft, and Notre Dame is losing their star cornerback, Benjamin Morrison. I am so glad that people will now stop asking me about whether or not Benjamin Morrison is going to come back next year because I don't know where that rumor started. I thought it was very clear to everyone that Morrison was not going to return to Notre Dame no matter what, even though he suffered that hip injury in the middle of the season. Like, it just wasn't going to happen. He's going to be a 1st or 2nd round pick. He'd made his intentions clear privately that he was going to the NFL after the season, and he's going to be great in the NFL. Unfortunately, I think his draft stock took a dip because of his injury, but I am very confident he's going to be a great player in the NFL, and he's going to go down as one of the greatest cornerbacks in Notre Dame history, even though he really only played 2.5 years. He had 6 interceptions as a true freshman. That's crazy. All of them really came at the second half of the year. He had 3 in one game, that snow game against Boston College, and he had one of the most memorable plays in recent memory when he returned that interception to the house against Clemson when they were a top 5 team at the time. It was like the first really big win of the Marcus Freeman era. That was one of Benjamin Morrison's best games of his career. So he had a lot of memorable moments. And then in 2022, Notre Dame, Ohio State, he basically shut down Marvin Harrison Jr. in that game. And teams just really didn't throw his way all that much. Like, he had those 6 interceptions as a true freshman. He had 3 as a sophomore. And then he didn't have any this past season in the half season that he did play because teams just did not throw his way. It was just clamps on that side and basically eliminated whatever wide receiver he was covering from the equation. For his career, he still racked up 18 pass breakups and 9 interceptions in just 2.5 years. So it's really, really impressive. But as disappointing as it is to lose a guy like Benjamin Morrison, the emergence of Leonard Moore has been one of the bright spots of the 2024 season. I never expected that Leonard Moore would be able to play to the level that he did this season in replacement of Benjamin Morrison. It was unbelievable, especially when you consider the fact that Leonard Moore's first start was against Louisville, and he played well, but he also gave up a touchdown in that game and another deep pass, but he was playing the field spot instead of boundary, which is his natural position. He was playing actually in place of Christian Gray that game, but then Benjamin Morrison went down in the Stanford game, and after that, Leonard Moore came in and did not miss a beat. And then by the end of the year, he became the better corner than Christian Gray. So I'm always going to remember Benjamin Morrison for what he did and all the, interceptions and great moments that he had. But I'm also going to remember that quote he had before this season because it was insane when he said it at the time. He said, "Leonard Moore is going to have a better career than me." And I was like, what? And mind you, Leonard Moore did not even participate in spring practice because he enrolled in the spring, which is actually what Benjamin Morrison did as well when he was a freshman. And I'm thinking, I like the guy as a recruit, 4-star player, but better than Benjamin Morrison? And guess what? He might actually be right. Their careers are so far pretty similar because even though Benjamin Morrison came in and started the first game of the year against Ohio State, which took everyone by surprise, he didn't really come on until the second half of his true freshman season. Leonard Moore just wasn't offered the opportunity to start at the beginning of the season because they had Christian Gray and Benjamin Morrison in front of him, but then he comes in for Benjamin Morrison and was lights out. He was unbelievable in that Ohio State game. So Benjamin Morrison is going to go down as one of the greatest cornerbacks in Notre Dame history, and the guy who replaced him might end up being better, which is crazy. Either way, Notre Dame is going to be set at cornerback for a long, long time, so long as one man remains in charge of that room. And that one man is defensive backs coach Mike Mickens. And coming up next, I'm going to explain why it is so important that Mickens gets promoted to replace Al Golden and become Notre Dame's defensive coordinator. So Luke Smith and I already talked about Al Golden's departure quite a bit in yesterday's show. He is now officially the defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. Really wish him well because he did so many great things for Notre Dame and is a big reason why Notre Dame got to the national championship this season. But now the Irish are searching for his replacement. They need a defensive coordinator, and everyone is saying the same thing. This isn't a groundbreaking thought, and I agree with it. Mike Mickens should be Notre Dame's next defensive coordinator. I believe he is the obvious choice for the job. He turned around one of the program's biggest weaknesses into one of its greatest strengths. When I grew up watching Notre Dame football, cornerback was almost always a liability for Notre Dame. Now, they did have some good players come through, like Julian Love was really good, should have won the Thorpe Award, but as a whole, that position was not very deep or not very talented most years. Insert Mike Mickens during the Brian Kelly era, actually, and then immediately turned around. He is an exceptional evaluator of talent, and he is great at developing that talent once he gets them on board. This is the same guy that found Benjamin Morrison, who started as a true freshman, Christian Gray, Leonard Moore, and Sauce Gardner, who's one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. He found him at Cincinnati when no one else realized how good he could be, and then Mike Mickens helped develop him into an all-time great college cornerback. So you've got that, right? That's a skill that very few people have. I would say he is the best defensive backs coach in the entire country. But again, that's just a position coach. Making the jump to a defensive coordinator is obviously a big deal. But Al Golden, who we all know is a great defensive coordinator, elite defensive mind, raved about Mike Mickens and even said that he would lean on Mickens sometimes to call coverages or make calls at certain points in the game. Now, it's really encouraging that they were so collaborative, but I think the fact that Al Golden would trust Mike Mickens in those situations says a lot about him because, let's be honest, there are some coordinators out there who they don't want to hear anyone else on game day. They want to make all the calls. They want to have all the power and all the control. Al Golden wasn't like that, partially because of his personality, but also because Mike Mickens deserved that kind of respect and credibility. So Mike Mickens has some experience calling the defense, and he also has a great relationship with Marcus Freeman. They go way back to their time in high school in Dayton, Ohio. They coached together at Cincinnati before either of them came over to Notre Dame. And now Mike Mickens has worked under Marcus Freeman for several years. So you have that, the connection between the head coach and Mike Mickens. And if Mike Mickens is promoted as defensive coordinator, you have a defensive-minded head coach who also has been defensive coordinator who can work with him and help sort of guide him during those early years where he's becoming acclimated to the additional responsibility of being a coordinator. Another key component in all of this is that if they do promote Mickens, they can continue building on what they had with Al Golden. Like, Mike Mickens will surely tweak some things, right? He's not just going to be an Al Golden replica. No one should ever do that. He should be himself and try to tweak some things to the scheme, but it's going to be the same terminology. They're going to be emphasizing the same things, and they're going to continue to build and develop that level and that standard that they have maintained for the past couple of years as one of the best defenses in the entire country. Like, they're not going to have to break in a whole new scheme or all these new terms or different things like that. All the standards and terms that are already in place can continue with Mike Mickens as the DC. And also, the players seem to love him. He understands the culture of that locker room. He understands the place. He understands how to recruit to Notre Dame. Like, these are all things helping out Mike Mickens, and there are a bunch of reasons why I believe he is the clear choice to be Notre Dame's defensive coordinator. But with that being said, I understand that there are some risks involved hiring a first-time defensive coordinator, especially at a program like Notre Dame, fresh off a berth in the national championship, where expectations are extremely high. Like, we all have to be honest with ourselves. There is a chance that if Mike Mickens gets hired or gets promoted to become the defensive coordinator, it might not work out. It's possible that he's just best suited as a position coach. We don't know for certain. And anyone who is saying, like, they know for a matter of fact that Mike Mickens is going to be a great defensive coordinator is just lying, because none of us know that to be true. I think he will be a really good defensive coordinator, but we don't know, and that's the risk in promoting him because he's just never done this before. But I would also point out that there's a risk in not promoting him because he wants this job. He wants to be a defensive coordinator, and he wants to be the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. And if he's not promoted, I think he's going to leave because there's going to be other jobs out there. He could get another Power 4 defensive coordinator job elsewhere if Notre Dame doesn't choose to promote him. And I understand why he would do that, because it's like, if you really want that job and then Notre Dame brings in a new guy and you now have to work for that guy at the job that you wanted, that's tough to do, man. Like, they're all humans, right? I wouldn't want to do that at my job. If I really wanted a promotion, I thought I was more than qualified. I thought I earned it. And then when it came time to do the interviews, I'm like, yep, I'm going to get it. And then they hire someone else. And now not only do I not get that job, I have to work for the guy that they gave it to over me. I wouldn't love it. I wouldn't love it. I don't think, a lot of other people would either. So I think that's the risk you run. You could lose Al Golden and Mike Mickens in the same offseason if he doesn't get promoted. And I'm not saying that's the main reason why they should hire him, but I do think that's a factor. Yes, there is a risk in promoting him, but there's also a risk in not promoting him. And I think that outweighs everything else here in the situation. At this point, it seems like Notre Dame is going to conduct a search, which I agree with. They should ask around and see, hey, what's out there? Because you never know unless you ask. And maybe there's this star candidate that none of us have ever considered that's like, hey, I would love to come to Notre Dame and be the defensive coordinator. And if he's far and away the better option than Mike Mickens as a defensive coordinator, you have to consider it. I know that there's some smoke out there that maybe Ohio State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles is looking to leave. I don't really know why, because he's paid over $2 million and he gets to coach, a team who had the best defense in the entire country last year. They just won a national championship, but maybe he wants to get out of Columbus, wants to go somewhere else. Maybe he really likes Notre Dame. You got to at least consider it, right? Because he just built the best defense in college football. But I ultimately don't think Jim Knowles is going to be. I know that some people have also mentioned like Jim Leonhard. Like, has there been a defensive coordinator search in the past, 5+ years that did not include Jim Leonhard as a potential candidate? I'm not just talking about Notre Dame. I'm talking about like every big-time program in college football. So I don't really think he's an option, but I think Notre Dame should at least, see what's out there, but they also have to move quickly because college football, especially in the offseason, like these things move fast. You cannot afford to wait around. So I trust the Notre Dame coaching staff. I trust Marcus Freeman. I trust, whoever is helping him out in the athletic department. I trust them that they're going to move swiftly and efficiently to find the best choice to be Notre Dame's next defensive coordinator. But ultimately, I think it's going to be Mike Mickens. I think that they're going to look around and they're going to see, you know what? Mike Mickens is the best choice for Notre Dame at this point in time, and I think he is ultimately going to be the next defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. And then what you can do to help him out is you can hire a safeties coach full-time, because now that Al Golden is gone, they are allowed to hire a full-time person on staff to replace him. And since Mike Mickens is already on the staff, that leaves one more spot. And considering they never hired a full-time replacement for Chris O'Leary, now they can do that. So then you have someone coaching the safeties. Mike Mickens is focused on the quarterbacks and the defense as a whole. And then you've got Marcus Freeman, a defensive-minded head coach, to help him out and help guide him here as he becomes acclimated to this new position. I think it's going to work out really well. I can't say for certain, but ultimately I have a ton of confidence that Mike Mickens is going to be the guy, and he's going to end up doing really well for Notre Dame. All right, that's a wrap for this episode, and that is a wrap on the 2024 college football season here on Locked On Irish. The off-season content is already in full swing. As you can see, we just spent a whole episode talking about the transfer portal, but man, I just really can't believe the season is over. It was the longest season ever, but also the most fun one of my lifetime, and I already can't wait for next season. But right now, my plan is to be back on Tuesday of next week, unless Notre Dame hires a defensive coordinator in between now and then I'll probably do some sort of emergency reaction show, but we will cross that bridge when we get there. Thank you so much for tuning in all season long. I know I've said thank you a ton on the show this week, but I'm just extremely grateful for everyone who has tuned in all season long. Or if you're new to the show, thanks for joining us here later on. I hope that you stay with us, and I hope that you subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. And if you enjoyed the show today, remember, like the video below if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to the podcast, remember, rate the show 5 stars and leave a review. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I will see you next week.